Badger fans, let's talk about some narratives that I think need to die. I'm done talking about them. I'm sick of them. And then let's talk about a couple things that are legitimately frustrating me.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Badger fans? Welcome to Locked On Badgers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Ryan Herrings. For all the everydayers out there who listen every day, thank y'all so much. Really appreciate it. Y'all are incredible. Love you so much. Let's get into it. Today's episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Right now, go over to 5hourenergy.com. Use promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. All right. I want to talk about some things that I think, like, there's some narratives out there that just won't die. And I think some of them can probably die. I don't think we need to continue rehashing them. Now, we will. Like, if y'all want to talk about them, we'll talk about them because that's what this community is about, right? I'm never going to gatekeep people if you want to talk about it, but the first one I keep seeing thrown out there is, you shouldn't have fired Paul Chryst. I see that on Twitter. I see that on parts of message boards. I see that from the analysts I talk to. Or they'll say you needed to go with Jim Leonhard. Let's start with Paul Chryst. And I've said it before. It was the right decision to move on from Paul Chryst, period. It was the right decision to move on from Paul Chryst. And that does not invalidate anything he did at Wisconsin, because he did some amazing things at Wisconsin. Bowl wins, successful seasons, consistent success. It was time to go. Let's just go back to his era, right? The end of his tenure. And I think people are starting to get rose-colored glasses because the Luke Fickell thing hasn't happened as quickly as people wanted. And because of that, I think people are starting to get rose-colored glasses looking at the end of Paul Chryst's tenure. He didn't have a recruiting department for like 8 months, guys. Like, he had kind of given up on that. And towards the end, he threw Mickey Turner in there and a few other things. But, like, he didn't have a recruiting department for like 8 months. You have the Illinois loss, the Ohio State loss. You have hiring Bobby Ingram to be the quarterback's coach, former receiver and tight ends coach. Like, I'm just the staff hires, it felt like there was way too much loyalty. It felt like he had kind of punted on recruiting, or at least punted on the energy needed. He had stopped going to functions. He had stopped, to some degree, marketing the program. Those weren't things he really liked that you need in the NIL era. In many different facets, this thing had started to take on water, and it was slowing down. It was getting stuck in the mud. It was getting stuck in the channel. You had to make that move. You just had to. You had to make that move. That was the right move. And then we can talk about it, but if you want to compare the resume of Jim Leonhard or Luke Fickell, in my opinion, Luke Fickell's the right hire. If you had hired Jim Leonhard and Badger fans found out Luke Fickell was available, 90% of Badger fans, 95% of Badger fans would have lost their minds. Not all of them, right? There were certainly people right after the hire was made that said Jim Leonhard should have gotten the job. And time will tell if those people are right or wrong. Like, it's too early to say with Fickell. It's too early to say. Again, I've said the right move was to move on from Paul Chryst. Whether or not the right move is hiring Luke Fickell, the jury's still out on that. I'm not going to try to sell you one way or the other. I do think the resume was such that you couldn't pass that opportunity up. You just couldn't. And most Badger fans, by the way, love the move. Most people love the move. Most people nationally love the move. Doesn't mean it will work, but it was a move that made a ton of sense. You landed a high pedigree, high profile, proven coach who felt like a Midwestern guy, who felt like he would embrace the culture of Wisconsin. I still think it's going to work. Just full disclosure. If people are off that train, that's 100% cool. Again, we don't tell people how to fan on this show. I still think it's going to work. I'm getting a little nervous about the offensive coordinator and just the offense we're running. But I still think Fickell's going to work. I really do, because I think he's building the foundation in a certain way. But yeah, we got to stop talking about we shouldn't have let Paul Chryst go. That thing was taking on water. And regardless of whether or not Fickell ends up being the right hire, you had to move on from Paul Chryst, in my opinion. I think you had to. All right. Next thing I want to talk about is this idea that this idea that you can't change the culture or you can't change the identity at Wisconsin. I just think that's a bunch of malarkey. Well, let me be really clear with what I'm saying. Part of what Wisconsin needs to do always has to be, you have to be tough, you have to be physical, you have to have a great culture. Like, I'm not saying change any of those things. I was talking to a Big Ten analyst the other day, and he was saying, you can't throw the ball around at Wisconsin. You coming in, you're trying to change that. That's not going to work. You got to run the ball. And I'm like, stop it. To me, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. This idea that people are now saying, well, of course it's not working. You're running the air raid. You're trying to throw it around the ball a bunch of Wisconsin. You can absolutely throw the ball around a bunch of Wisconsin. Stop it with that nonsense. I'm done hearing this narrative that, no, you have to run the ball there. You have to play, 2 tight ends, 3 tight ends, 2 running backs, a fullback. I saw Purdue in the 90s throw the ball all around in the Big Ten. Now, they weren't always great because they're Purdue, but if it can work at Purdue, it can work at Wisconsin. You know how you throw the ball around at Wisconsin? You get the right quarterback and you get some receivers. Done. Like this, we got to stop making this so complicated. I can't believe they changed the identity at Wisconsin. You can't do that. Well, if Mabry or if Mordecai had been the right quarterback and we had thrown the ball all around last year, people would have loved it. The truth is we haven't gotten the right quarterback, and that's why it hasn't worked. It's not because you can't go 10 personnel or something at Wisconsin. You absolutely can. You got to get the right quarterback. Duh. Why are people making this so complicated? I do want to point out when people say you got to keep certain identity at Wisconsin, that like physicality, being able to run the ball, being good in the trenches, yes, those things have to remain. But the people that are starting to push the narrative, well, you can't run that type of offensive scheme in Wisconsin, that's nonsense. Don't buy that. Don't buy that. That's ridiculous. I don't want to hear it. I saw Purdue throw the ball around the field because they had Drew Brees and a bunch of other quarterbacks and Kyle Orton, and you can go down the list. If you get good quarterbacks, you can throw the ball. Like Madison is not in a gulag in Siberia. Like it was 75 degrees, 80 degrees last weekend. I'm telling you, the reason we're not throwing the ball well is not because of our past identity, or it's not because of anything like that. It's because we haven't found the right fits at receiver, quarterback, and the offensive coordinator to make all those pieces work. That's why. And it's not. That's it, right? You got to find the right pieces to do that. And by the way, you kind of have to find the right pieces to run any offense like that. It's not a scheme that can't work at Wisconsin. You got to hit on the quarterbacks, right? And it's a damn shame that Tyler Van Dyke got hurt, because I'm not saying he was going to or not. And it is just one drive against Bama. I liked what we were starting to see a little bit there. But you got to hit on the quarterback. You got to hit on the receivers. And if you do that, you can run any scheme you want to. And you can do that at Wisconsin. Now, I mentioned earlier, Longo, I think I'm going to get into that later. That's actually the topic we're getting into. I'm a little frustrated at what I think is some stubbornness there. But I do want to just throw it out there. You tell me if I'm wrong. Like, you can change the identity at Wisconsin. You just got to find the right pieces. This is not that complicated. We made it too complicated. All right, we're going to come back with a few more narrative things that I think people are just talking about too much. Like, stop. Or keep talking about it, because I'm never going to tell anybody how to fan. But it's not things I'm going to talk about quite as much. But we are going to take a quick break for our friends of the show over at 5 Hour Energy. 5 Hour Energy, I've talked about it. They are the number one source, right? If you need a little bit of energy, getting into your day, coming off of lunch, maybe. That's where I'll use 5 Hour Energy. If I need a little pick me up for lunch, I've got a bunch of stuff to do, and maybe a little weighed down by food. 5 Hour Energy is portable, it's quick, no sugar, great flavors, everything you want from some type of pick me up to help you get through the day, to get more done on your to-do list. That's what you can use 5 Hour Energy for. It's something I use. I've talked about it. I like the watermelon flavor. I know everybody has their other favorites. Right now, we have a great offer for our Locked On listeners, as we always do. Right now, if you go to 5 Hour Energy, that's 5hourenergy.com. You can get all your 5 Hour Energy products there. You can use our promo code LOCKEDONCFB. You're going to get 20% off your order. This offer is only valid through September 30th. It cannot be used with any other promotions. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. Get a little bit more energy in your day. All right, let's get back into the show. Let's talk about a few more narratives that I think are just talked about a little too much. We're going to do that next on Locked On Badgers. All right. The first one is, I'm going to throw this out there, and this is kind of a double edge for me, because I do think this needs to happen, but I also simultaneously think it gets talked about too much. Everybody just says, play the young guys. Play the young guys. Throw them out there. Young guys. Yes. And I love the 2024 class. I've talked about it, man. I've waxed poetically about it. In 30 years, I might be sitting around a campfire telling my kids and my grandkids about the 2024 class and the foundation it laid for Wisconsin football. Like, I love this class. This class is really good. The answer is not just to play all the young guys. I'm sorry. It's not. You've seen a little bits of Dylan Jones or Darian DeBree. What are they averaging yards per carry? It's not that much different than Ches. It's not. Now, there's growth potential there. They'll get better with reps, but the idea that you just throw the young guys in there and that fixes all this stuff, it's not going to. It's not going to because, A, they don't know the schemes, right? They don't know the schemes as well as the other players on the roster. They're not going to be able to execute as well. You're going to have to simplify things. They're going to make more mistakes. But B, there's so many other areas on this team that this team does not have everything it needs except for one like kind of athletic, lengthy cornerback. And then you're like, well, in that case, just play Xavier Lucas and it's a complete team. This team has issues on the defensive line. It's got some issues at linebacker. It's got some issues. We saw it in the secondary last week. It's got some issues with pass rush. It's got some issues with separation at receiver. It's got quarterback issues. Like there's a lot of stuff on this team right now where just throwing a bunch of young guys out there, you could end up making it worse, right? Like you could end up taking all these kind of issues we already have and then creating some freshman mistakes, you could compound some issues. So some of these young guys have to play more, and I'm 100% on board with that. I think it is as the season goes, you're going to see these players tapered into roles. But I think there's a little too much energy into the quick fix phenomenon, right? It's like the backup quarterback phenomenon where everybody thinks the backup quarterback, you got to go to him. You got to go to him. And I'm already hearing people say, you got to go to Mabry Medtoyer, right? And I want to get into that as part of this discussion. It feels like that's the ready-made answer that Badger fans want. Just go to the young guys, Darian, Dupree. Let's see more Dylan Johnson on the defensive line. Let's see more Lafayette or Heiberger. And you can't play with that many young guys. You just can't. And if you start doing that, man, one of those young guys can make – this season's going to come down to the margins, okay? This season's going to come down to the margins. And I'm going to get into some of the veterans and some of the issues I have later in my frustrations. But you have to – like you're not going to blow out some of the Big Ten teams on the schedule, the Minnesotas, Nebraskas, Iowas. If you win, you're going to have to grind those games out because that's kind of who Wisconsin might have to be this year, which means you can't have freshman mistakes in those games. So you got to be very careful about just willy-nilly throwing the young guys out there. And I think, again, it's talked about a little too much. Now, I think as the season goes on, you're going to see an expanded role for Darian Dupree probably. You're going to see an expanded role for Dylan Johnson. When Heiberger gets back, you're going to see him play. I would like to see Lafayette play. I'd like to see Xavier Lucas play. But that's not a Band-Aid that covers everything up, and you got to be careful about some of the other mistakes it could cause. So while I get the talking point, and I'm right there with you on this one, Badger, like anybody saying play the young guys, it's becoming a little too much of a, in my opinion, just throw them all out there. It'll fix things. Maybe. There's spots in this roster right now that it's not going to fix, right? So just be careful. You don't want to throw guys out there before they're ready either, which gets me into Mabry Medtoyer. Love the dude, right? I've talked to his coach. I've talked to him. I like the physical skill set. I like the size. I like the arm. He wasn't at the level of Locker Van Dyke watching in Platteville. There was some inaccuracy issues. Like he looked like a true freshman, which is how he should look. There were also physical plays where he made a play rolling on to the right, I think it was, where he made a really nice throw. Like he showcased the tools. You see the size. He's bigger than Braden Locke. He moves better. I don't think he's ready right now. I don't think he's ready. And I think he's physically or mentally tough enough where if you throw him out there, I don't think like quarterbacks are always made out of glass where people are like, don't ruin him. But like you can, it's not so much ruining him. It's you can start to create some bad habits, right? Where if he's not trusting his eyes, maybe he's trying to run a little bit more, maybe he's getting hit a little bit more, then maybe he gets nicked up, and then maybe he doesn't get those practice reps. I'm just saying you got to be careful, man, with a Mabry Medtoyer who could conceivably be the quarterback of the future. I don't think he's ready right now. I definitely want to see what Braden Locke looks like. He's got 2 weeks. He's got a bye week. He's got another week of preparation against USC. And if for whatever reason, and it's never just on the quarterback, but if the passing game looks really bad again, then maybe you start thinking about it. It's too early right now. It's too early right now to say we got to start thinking about Mabry Medtoyer. No, we got to put all the eggs in the Braden Locke basket because we got to win games. We got to win games right now. This cannot be a developmental year, which again goes back to what I think a lot of people talk about with the young guys. Well, let's develop them. Let's get better for next year. No, this is not tanking for a draft pick type thing. You got to win games this year. You can't win 4 or 5 games. And if Braden Locke is the better quarterback this year than Mabry Medtoyer, which I think he is, then you got to play him. And I'm sorry, like if it's going to be frustrating at times, or if you think Mabry is more of an upside down the road, which I would agree with, he's not ready right now, I don't think. Well, he's going to start getting more reps, right, with TVD out. Mabry's going to start getting more and more reps, and maybe he starts taking bigger and bigger jumps. And if that's the case, sure. But from what we saw in Blackville, and I think other reporters would say the same, it felt like the top two was pretty clearly above the next group. And again, that's not a knock on Mabry. Don't take that negative. He's a true freshman. Locke's in his third camp. He should be ahead of him, and I thought he was. So I would say on the quarterback one, I'd put a pin in it, right? Don't pull the pin out of the grenade. Keep the pin in the grenade and see what Locke looks like this week against USC. Let's be fair to him, right? He came into a Bama game where he hadn't been getting starter reps. He came into a Bama game against Bama. He's had some bad luck with the teams he's come into with. So let's see how he looks against USC, and then let's revisit this conversation. But I hope that we're not in a spot this year where we have to turn to Mabry, unless he has made tremendous strides in practice, in which case that's a win-win. Like, if he's ready, I'm all about it. I just don't want to short-circuit the process. Okay. Yeah, so those are my narratives. Do I get any more ones? Hold on. I'm on my laptop right now, so I got to double-check my list here. Okay, I think those are my narratives. I'll give you another one that I feel like people want me to stop talking about, and that's the defensive line. I don't know what to tell you on that one. I don't think it's a scheme thing. I know there's a lot of discussion about scheme. You got to scheme it up differently. You got to put more bodies in the box. I've already made my point kind of clear on that one. I don't think it's as much of a scheme thing. I know guys like Ryan Eilers will disagree. I know guys like Curtis Holland will disagree. And both those dudes are super sharp. I love both those dudes, right? But you got to stand on your beliefs too. And I don't think it's as much a scheme thing as they just don't have enough horses up front. And that doesn't get solved by putting extra horses on the defensive line, in my opinion. I think it's a tough spot Tressel's in. I like some of the young pieces. I was excited to see Brandon Lane get a few more reps last week. I like what Elijah Hills has shown. But it's just not overall. Let's just be real, right? Like, if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, don't call it a dinosaur. Like, the defensive line's not a strength this year. And that's a tough thing to scheme around. There's positions on the team, man, you can scheme around easier, right? Not a lot of depth in the tight end room. Go more 10 personnel. Use more like a H-back guy. Like, not great receivers. Okay, we're gonna play more tight ends. We're gonna play more running backs. Not a great defensive line. That's a tough one to scheme around. It's like offensive line, defensive line, quarterback, probably secondary too. I mean, there's just spots that are really hard to scheme around. That's why I give Tressel some grace this year. I don't think he's playing with a fully loaded deck yet. And those guys might get better as the year goes on. Right? Dylan Johnson, even a guy like Curtis Neal hasn't played a ton of football. Brandon Lane, Elijah Hills, that group could get better and better. But even if those four keep getting better, there's not much depth there with a Ben Barton, and there's just not much depth there. So, yeah, I know people are kind of like, dude, we get it. You're not super high on the defensive line, but I think that's a central part of this team's inability to stop the run. So every week when we talk about like what went wrong, it's, well, you didn't control the offensive line between the tackles. So it is what it is on that one. All right, we're going to take a quick break. Then I'm going to come back and talk about some things that are frustrating me. So those are some narratives that are out there that I think are maybe overblown. I'm going to talk about some frustrations that I don't think are overblown. We're going to get into that next on Locked On Badgers. But first, a quick break for our friends of the show. Also, a quick second to say thank you for tuning in. As always, today's episode is brought to you by our great friends over at FanDuel, longtime partners of the show. FanDuel is incredible. Right now, there's a great offer going on over at FanDuel. We know NFL's here. If you go over to FanDuel, you're going to be able to see if you have YouTube TV, the YouTube TV platform, you're going to be able to see all the out-of-market NFL Sunday ticket games for free through week 3 over on FanDuel if you make a $5 bet. That's awesome, man. You just get more football. What's wrong? Who can complain about that, right? So YouTube TV base plan, you'll watch every regular season NFL game. All you need is a Google account, current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. And you're already using the great service at FanDuel, which is the best sportsbook out there. So go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon, America's #1 sportsbook. Please do it responsibly, but you're not going to get better than FanDuel. All right, let's jump back in the show. As always, man, I appreciate the heck out of everybody tuning in. Always do. The sport's awesome as we continue just building the channel up. All right, let's talk some things that are frustrating to me. Some of my biggest frustrations through 2 weeks. I think maybe my biggest one, because like this season has felt it's been a little painful. And I was thinking about what has really ticked me off is probably the wrong word. I don't know if I get ticked off. I get kind of sad is kind of where I go when we don't play well and I get disappointed. I think the veteran mistakes, like when I was really thinking about it, man, it's some veteran mistakes that I just didn't expect from guys I really like and I have a lot of respect for. And the first one is like that Chez Malusi fumble on your side of the field against Bama. You just broke off a 30-yard run. Like, nominally, you're still in this game, even though it felt like TBD was out at that point. I think we all knew where this game was going, but God, bro, you can't fumble that ball, man, as a veteran leader. 2 arms on it, whatever you got to do. Put 2 arms and 2 legs and some Velcro on it. You can't fumble that ball, man. And you're the veteran. You're the leader in that running back room. You're the starter. You're running back 1. It's stuff like that I think has really hurt us this year. It's been a couple drops from Will Pauling, which Will has generally played really well, but like, you're the best receiver on the team. I don't think you can drop those, right? It's been a couple weird linebacker fits from Chaney and Jaheim Thomas. Like, again, man, you all are the starting guys. You're both veterans. Chaney, your coach's son, who I've raved about in the offseason. I love the intangibles Chaney brings to the team. You got to be more gap discipline. And some of this stuff, it's been pretty easy to see on film. And Jaheim Thomas, man, you're coming over from Arkansas, highly touted, big-time player. Again, saying some of the same issues. You got to be better there. You got to be a little more disciplined. And it's those things I think have been a little frustrating to me. A couple penalties on veterans on the offensive line. It was Tyler Van Dyke making a couple weird throws week 1 and week 2, where as a veteran quarterback, I don't expect that. It was Nathaniel Vakos missing 2 kicks you can't miss, right? And this is a guy who's now in his 30-year kicking. So to me, it's been some of the veterans that have played, to me, uncharacteristically not as clean as I thought they would. The other one for me is, I think at times there's been a stubbornness with the play calling offensively. That's the other one that's really frustrated me. Like, there was moments in the game I thought where Bama showed you exactly what they were going to do. They were telling you, we're laying minefields between the tackles. Try to run it. And we would just run it anyway. You got to take a shot. And we've talked about this all season long. You got to find a way to scheme up shots, take shots. And if the system is too complex, then that's where I get into the stubbornness thing, then make it easier. Like, figure something out where you can scheme up a couple of easier looks, because it can't be this hard. It can't be this difficult. I keep saying it feels like a German tank stuck in the mud in 1942. Like, it's just, everything feels so difficult. And to me, there's an element of stubbornness there, right? There's an element of, I talked about this with Greg Gard a little bit. I like a lot of things Greg Gard does. I think he can be kind of stubborn at times, where if something's not working, they'll keep going to it. It feels like at times we just kind of keep going to the well, whether it's working or not. And I think you have to take a few more shots. I think you have to use a little bit of motion. You have to find a way to get your more explosive guys the ball. And it hasn't happened as much as I think it should have this year. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not in the room. I'm not a coach. Phil Longo knows more about offense than I do, obviously. But as fans, we're also smart enough to see this isn't working, right? We're smart enough to see that last year's short yard situations and packages, I think we finished 25% on fourth and 1, right? A lot of that was out of the shotgun. A lot of that was that zone read action. It's not working, man. Like, you got to figure something else out. And I'm not saying it's stubbornness. I'm saying that's kind of what it feels like to me. I want to be fair. Like, I'm not talking to Coach Long. I'm not in the room. But it feels like an element of stubbornness to me. All right, guys. That is the show today on Wisconsin. Thank you for tuning in, as always. Appreciate you. When you're done here, go check out Locked On College Football. All the biggest stories in the college football world. A bunch of stuff coming up. I think we're going to have Deer Raid coming up. We'll have Curtis Holland. I think Justin might even helm a show. Rajiv we're going to have. I think we're going to have Nick Osen coming up. We're going to have Nick Bruzewitz coming up. We're going to have I think a former Badger player coming up. We got a bunch coming up. So stick with us through the bye week. A ton of great content on Wisconsin. Let's go.